Hey everybody, Plasma1945 with you, and I am hanging out in an F5. This is a video I'm actually playing in back. This is my first flight in an F5. Well, first controlled flight, I guess I would call it. And it's actually really silly because I managed to rip off my wingtips, fly on fire, and land. So, this is on GS. I am with Nomad 6-1, he's in the other F5, and we just got the modules. We were like, well, you know what, let's try it out. Let's see how this thing flies. So we grabbed the hot F5s, and they're fairly easy to taxi out and get going. Of course, my stick isn't set up, so I'm bouncing all over the place, but we both make it into the air and bring up our gear. I think the takeoff speed is about 160, 180 on the F5. You really need to give it power to take off. It's not like an F15 with a large gliding body. So, you know, we're flying around, we head off into the mountains and through the hills, just having fun and just, you know, trying to get the feel of the plane. There's dogfights going on in another part of the map, and at this point, I pitched down and I pitched up. The G-stresses on that plane were pretty intense, and I think I ripped off the very tips of my wings. You can actually see it in just a moment here, but that was enough to set the wingtips on fire, and Nomad's report to me was, hey Plasma, you're putting out a lot of smoke. Now, I didn't realize that I was actually on fire, because moments before that we were testing the F5 and we were watching how each of our engines would produce puffs of black jet smoke when we would go from about 80% thrust to afterburner and back in and out. So that is a very telltale sign of an F5. It's almost like a MiG-29. If you're flying, your wings won't go on fire unless you do something like what I just did, which is having a lot of fuel and then pulling forwards and then pulling back on the stick real quick. But the F5, as you're flying around, as you go between about 70% thrust to 80-90% thrust, it will generate quite a bit of black smoke, and unless you hit the afterburner, that smoke is going to be persistent, so you will be visible against the sky, not as much against the ground. So at this point I pressed F2 and I realized that I was on fire. So I immelmaned it and basically turned back around to head towards the nearest airport. Now, on the Growling Sidewinder map, there is the Kutaisi airport, which is the main one, but there is another smaller one next to it. I can't remember what its name is, but if you guys do remember what the name is, just drop it in the chat. As you can see, I'm trying to come back. I've cut back my thrust a little bit, and I'm looking for that airport. All I remember from flying in the Georgia map is that that airport is right next to a big hill. Not necessarily a mountain, but a hill that's just off the side of the map. Of course, at this point, I can't vector myself to any of the airports. Well, I could, but I'm not on the F10 map because the game considers me destroyed, even though I'm flying. So I'm basically a flying Dutchman here with fire coming out of my wingtips. Gear down, and I am looking for that airport, and nobody else can really help me out to guide me in because, again, they can't see me on the map. So, surprisingly enough, the plane is flying, it is stable, even though the wingtips are on fire. In another situation, what happened is that, and both Nomad and I both experienced it, if you take a higher G-turn, and depending on your loadout, you can actually rip the wings off much closer to the airframe, right, much closer to the body. In that situation, you're still flying, you're off of the F10 map, the game thinks that you're dead, but you can still fly and shoot guns. Of course, there's no missiles attached to your center line, so you can't shoot any missiles because they'll be gone at your wingtips. But you can still fly as long as you don't come out of afterburner. In this case, I have a lot more of the wings than I had in another flight later on this night, but I'm not going to show that because I am ashamed of myself. So this is a replay. I didn't save the video track from inside the cockpit, but this is pretty close. I think it's slightly off because I do remember touching down on the runway, but you know, in replay tracks on DCS, it can sometimes be a little bit off. Touchdown, no damage to the plane, and I'm on the ground. Hit the brakes. This is a very small airfield. I was really happy that I was actually able to land and pull back on the brakes. So there you go, guys. I've landed a plane that is on fire, and I'm still alive in theory. there's damage, and I'm not on the DCS F10 map, but I'm not considered actually dead. And, you know, I'm spectating myself from the plane outside, and I think at this point there was a couple other guys who were spectating, kind of laughing at me, going, what the hell did you do? Here's the funny part. I decided to go a little balls in. I think I started chatting here. I cut back my engines, and when I looked back at my plane, I could see that the puffs of smoke were decreasing depending on what was my fuel use. And I was like, okay, let's give it a few more seconds, and let me do a couple of turns here and vary my thrust. So as I'm varying my thrust and watching this, the smoke goes out. So I'm rolling around the runway, and I'm like, okay, I haven't done a repair. I still have about 1,000 pounds of fuel. Engines are fine. The smoke has gone out. Can I take this plane back to Kutaisi? And again, guys, if you know what this map is, what this airfield is, let me know. Okay, so I'm like, let's give it some gas. Let's take off, and let's bring this plane back to the home base. Because in theory, this is a neutral air base. I just borrowed it just to land, and I'm alive and back up in the air. So I was mildly impressed with the fact that I was able to land a plane that was on fire, but I was also impressed that the flight model allowed this. Now, I don't know if that should be something that's legitimate or not. If you've got into a dogfight with an F5 or a Mirage, you will notice that those planes do take a lot more damage than they seem to should. Maybe this is a glitch, but I was able to figure out the direction to Kutaisi, and I'm just ferrying the plane. If I was a proper test pilot, I would not have brought up my gear in this situation, because I could be crashing at any moment. But since this is DCS and this is, you know, unreal reality, I was like, you know what, the heck with it, I'm just going to go for the gusto and see if I can bring this plane back. Doing the testing of the controls, it's rolling, it's flying, it's stable. The only thing I'm missing is about 3 inches off of each wing. Now that's kind of funny. But yeah, so I actually take it back and I land it, and I climb up a little bit so I could spot Kutaisi, and after popping some rolls, there's Kutaisi so I can see it, and just start to gently come back in. So within visual, I think I'm about 2.5 miles out here, so I can definitely land it. The plane, again, I'm very surprised that after the gun was even working. As you can see, I fired some rounds there. Despite everything being on fire, it still flies. And I did not do a repair on the ground at the other base, of course, because it was a neutral base. So, you know, get onto a nice turn here, bring the gear down, and come in for a nice landing. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this very random video of me flying on fire and landing a plane. And more videos coming soon. Plasma signing off.